The polished, reflective surfaces of the Apex Solutions boardroom gleamed under the harsh, unforgiving lights, amplifying the tension in the air. Marcus Thorne, CEO, once a titan of industry, now sat slumped at the head of the obsidian table, his immaculate suit rumpled, his face a mask of primal terror and disbelief. His usual confident smirk had been replaced by a grimace that etched deep lines around his mouth and eyes. Around him, a tableau of grim-faced officials, prosecutors, legal counsel, and stern regulatory agents, moved with chilling efficiency, their every action a hammer blow to his crumbling empire. A camera, positioned discreetly by one of the agents, zoomed in, not on Thorne's face, but on the empty, unclipped identification badge holder on his lapel, a stark symbol of his revoked authority, his fall from grace. He was ensnared, stripped bare of his power. The heavy oak door at the far end of the room creaked open almost imperceptibly. Standing in the threshold, cloaked in the subtle shadow of the hallway, was Elias Vance. He wore the crisp, pristine uniform of an Apex Solutions janitor, a stark contrast to the disarray of the room. Yet, his posture was not one of subservience, but of quiet, resolute power. His gaze, devoid of anger, was fixed on Thorne. It was a look of serene, almost surgical satisfaction, untainted by malice, born of absolute certainty. Thorne, catching Elias's eye, flinched. In that brief, gut-wrenching moment, the CEO's carefully constructed world imploded as he recognized the fatal error of his underestimation. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The unassuming presence he had dismissed, ridiculed, and exploited was the architect of his demise. A title card flashes across the screen, stark white against black. 6 months earlier, the pristine corridors of Apex Solutions hummed with a deceptive calm, a polished veneer over a labyrinth of ambition and quiet desperation. Elias Vance, the corporation's most unobtrusive, yet arguably most observant, employee, navigated these halls with a practiced grace that belied his profession. His mop bucket, a faithful companion, glided silently across floors that reflected the gleaming lights overhead, a perfect mirror to the curated image Apex projected to the world. Elias was a phantom. His presence was so integrated into the background hum of the corporate machine that most employees barely registered him, mistaking his quiet efficiency for a lack of intellect. This, however, was their gravest error. His eyes, keen and intelligent, missed nothing. As he meticulously cleaned the deserted executive floor late one evening, he would often pause, a faint, almost imperceptible frown creasing his brow as he observed a whiteboard filled with complex structural equations. A misplaced decimal here, a miscalculated load-bearing factor there, subtle, critical errors that, to the untrained eye, were invisible. Sometimes, with a swift, almost unconscious movement, he'd pick up a stray marker and make a minuscule, corrective adjustment to an equation, a ghost in the machine silently rectifying the mistakes of its supposed masters. Then, he would continue his work, leaving no trace of his intervention. His silence was not ignorance, it was strategic. The world of Apex Solutions was a gleaming monument to success, its soaring glass facade and minimalist interiors speaking volumes of its dominance in the architectural and development sector. Yet, beneath this polished exterior, a different kind of architecture thrived, one built on ambition, cutthroat politics, and an insidious culture of self-preservation. It was a place where ideas were currency, and some were better at acquiring them than others. At the very apex of this structure sat Marcus Thorne, the charismatic, impeccably tailored CEO. Thorne was a master of grand pronouncements and dazzling presentations, a man who exuded an aura of unshakable confidence. He moved through the offices with the effortless grace of a predator in his own domain, his booming laugh and easy charm masking a ruthless ego and an unshakable belief in his own invincibility. He viewed the world, and indeed his own company, as an extension of his will, a plaything to be molded to his personal glory. His inner circle, a collection of equally ambitious but far less scrupulous executives, fed his ego with sycophantic praise and facilitated his every whim, creating a protective bubble of impunity around him. They were the enforcers of his cult of personality, ensuring that no dissenting voice, No inconvenient truth ever reached his perfectly manicured ears. To them, Thorn was not just a leader. He was an unassailable deity, whose success was their own, and whose failures, if they ever dared to occur, would simply be someone else's problem. Elias, from his vantage point in the shadows, observed it all, every subtle shift in power dynamics, every whispered betrayal, every act of passive aggression that built the edifice of Thorn's unchallenged reign. He was a silent sentinel, recording the true blueprint of Apex Solutions. The air in the Apex Solutions executive lounge, usually thick with the scent of expensive coffee and hushed ambition, now vibrated with a raw, visceral tension. Marcus Thorn stood by the panoramic window, his back to his trembling senior staff. The city skyline spread beneath him like a sprawling, indifferent prophecy. His silhouette, usually an imposing figure of power, now seemed rigid, almost brittle. When he finally turned, his face was a mask of barely suppressed fury, a stark contrast to his usual composed demeanor. "The Sky Portal Project," he began, his voice dangerously low, each word a venomous dart. "Our flagship, our legacy, the very symbol of Apex's supremacy, is failing. Structurally, catastrophically." A collective gasp rippled through the room. The Sky Portal was more than just a building. It was Thorn's magnum opus, a billion-dollar edifice designed to etch his name into the annals of architectural history. Now, it threatened to become his tomb. Investigations had revealed a critical, deep-seated structural defect that jeopardized not only the entire project, but also the company's financial stability and, more acutely, Thorn's carefully cultivated reputation. "I don't care about the budget overruns. I don't care about your excuses," Thorn roared, his composure finally cracking. He slammed his fist onto the polished table, making the crystal water glasses jump. "I want answers, and I want solutions. Who is responsible for this abomination?" His gaze swept over the pale faces of his architectural team, lingering on the lead architect, a man named Henderson, who visibly shrank under the CEO's scrutiny. We followed the revised plans, Mr. Thorn," Henderson stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "The cost-saving modifications were approved by senior management." Thorn scoffed, a sound laden with contempt. "Revised plans? Cost-saving? Don't insult my intelligence, Henderson. These aren't modifications. This is sheer incompetence. I demand to know who the real architect is. The one who truly understands the structure, not these spineless, talentless hacks who parade as designers." His eyes narrowed, burning with a self-righteous fury. "Bring him to me. Bring me the real architect. The one with the answers. The one who knows how to fix this mess, instead of these amateurs." He was convinced someone else had to be the mastermind, someone he could blame, someone he could sacrifice to save his own skin. Elias, pushing his cleaning cart past the open boardroom door, heard every word. The rhythmic squeak of his cart wheels was the only sound for a moment, an ironic counterpoint to the unraveling chaos within. His face remained impassive, betraying none of the seismic shift occurring within him. He knew with chilling certainty that the original, flawless design for the Sky Portal was his. His name had been meticulously scrubbed from every document, his innovative, robust plans ruthlessly altered and compromised by Thorn and his coterie to shave off costs, inflate profits, and line their own pockets. They had dismissed him, cast him aside, erasing his brilliance to fuel their greed. One of Thorn's loyal lieutenants, ever eager to please, sidled up to the CEO. "Perhaps, sir, we can find someone else. Someone from the past, an external consultant, who can take the blame for the initial design flaws. We can spin it." The words hung in the air, a chilling testament to the ingrained corruption, the systemic propensity to sacrifice anyone to protect the powerful. Thorn considered it for a moment, then waved a dismissive hand. No, I want the real talent, the one who knows." As he spoke, his gaze flickered towards Elias, who was now subtly, almost imperceptibly, polishing a brass plaque near the door, his movements fluid and precise. "Excuse me, sir." Elias's voice was soft, almost unheard, blending with the low hum of the air conditioning. "But the structural integrity issues on the lower pilings are likely due to the altered load-bearing specifications for the central core. The original design had Thorne cut him off with a condescending chuckle, barely glancing at the janitor. "Thank you for your invaluable insight, Mr. Vance. I'm sure your expertise in floor wax extends to advanced structural engineering. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have actual architects to consult." He waved Elias away, dismissing him as nothing more than an inconvenient shadow. The irony was palpable, the microaggression a finely honed weapon in Thorne's arsenal. Utterly unaware that the true architect, the only one who truly understood, was the very man he had just so casually humiliated. The catalyst was now complete. The fluorescent hum of the Apex Solutions' nighttime corridors was a stark contrast to the earlier cacophony of Thorne's rage. Elias Vance moved through them, the familiar rhythm of his cleaning routine a meditative counterpoint to the storm brewing beneath his placid exterior. The dismissal, the ridicule, the casual cruelty of Thorne's words, they had landed not as insults, but as confirmation. Confirmation that the moment he had quietly anticipated, meticulously planned for, had finally arrived. His composure was absolute, a testament to years of forced patience and strategic observation. Arriving at his modest, meticulously clean apartment, Elias shed the janitor's uniform, replacing it with comfortable, but equally precise, casual wear. His movements were deliberate, economical. This was not a man consumed by fleeting anger or the desire for petty revenge. This was a man executing a long-conceived strategy. He walked to a nondescript bookshelf, its contents an eclectic mix of architectural theory, engineering manuals, and classic literature. Behind a worn copy of The Fountainhead, he found a small, almost invisible switch. With a soft click, a false back panel slid open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside lay a single, older model laptop, not a sleek, corporate-issued device, but a robust, customized machine and a collection of encrypted flash drives. He handled them with the reverence of a surgeon preparing for a complex operation. The laptop booted up swiftly, displaying a minimalist operating system. Elias's fingers, accustomed to the tactile feedback of a keyboard, moved with a silent, practiced speed across the keys. This was his hidden mechanism. It wasn't a secret weapon in the traditional sense, but a meticulously constructed digital fortress of irrefutable truth. For years, ever since his brilliant designs for the Sky Portal and several other landmark projects had been systematically stolen, bastardized, and attributed to others, Elias had been building his case. He had meticulously documented every original blueprint, every patented concept, every communication, every revision, and every instance of intellectual property theft within Apex Solutions. He had created a parallel, incorruptible record, a shadow archive of the company's true history. He selected a particular flash drive, inserting it into the laptop. A complex, multi-layered encryption program whirred to life, its interface a series of cascading lines of code. Elias typed in a series of passwords, his expression unchanging, a portrait of focused intent. He was not acting on impulse, but on a carefully calculated timeline. The Sky Portal failure was merely the final, unavoidable trigger. Within minutes, encrypted data packets began to stream from his laptop. They were directed to multiple, carefully chosen recipients. The Independent Committee for Architectural Ethics, ICA, a powerful, unbiased oversight body known for its rigorous standards and zero-tolerance policy for professional misconduct. The Federal Building Oversight Agency, FBOA, a government agency with the authority to halt construction, impose massive fines, and initiate criminal investigations for structural failures and fraud. Dr. Eris Thorne, no relation to Marcus Elias's former mentor, a renowned architectural historian and now the formidable head of the Guardians of Integrity, a leading nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting intellectual property rights in the design and engineering fields. Each data packet contained not just evidence of Thorne's culpability in the Sky Portal disaster, but a comprehensive, multi-project dossier detailing years of systemic intellectual property theft, fraudulent accounting practices, and a pattern of abusing lower-level employees and talented designers. The data was cross-referenced, authenticated, and presented in a format designed for maximum impact and irrefutability. Elias watched the progress bars fill, the silent transfer of information a stark contrast to the corporate bluster of the day. There was no triumphalism in his gaze, no overt satisfaction. Only the cold, clean efficiency of a plan coming to fruition. He closed the laptop, returning it and the flash drives to their hidden compartment. The silence in the apartment was absolute. The mechanism was activated. The unseen war had begun. Weeks after Thorne's explosive tirade and Elias's silent activation, an unsettling calm had settled over Apex Solutions. It was the deceptive lull before a storm, a silence that only amplified the underlying tension. Thorne, convinced he had weathered the immediate crisis through a combination of public relations damage control and internal scapegoating, was back to his usual bombastic self, oblivious to the insidious current beginning to pull at the foundations of his empire. The storm broke on a Tuesday morning, not with a crash of thunder, but with the quiet, inexorable force of a perfectly executed strategic maneuver. A fleet of unmarked, discreet black sedans pulled up to the gleaming facade of Apex Solutions. From them emerged a group of individuals whose demeanor alone commanded attention. They were impeccably dressed, their expressions unreadable, their movements synchronized and purposeful. This was not a routine audit. This was the arrival of the National Building Oversight Agency, NBOA, and they were not here to consult. Led by Agent Eleanor Vance, no relation to Elias, a woman whose sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing and whose professionalism bordered on the clinical, the team bypassed the usual layers of corporate bureaucracy. Their initial inquiries were directed straight to the legal and finance departments, bypassing Thorne's executive floor entirely. They presented their credentials with polite firmness, their questions delivered in measured tones that left no room for evasion. Marcus Thorne, alerted by a panicked administrative assistant, initially dismissed their presence as a minor bureaucratic inconvenience. He descended to the main reception area, radiating his usual charm, a practiced smile plastered on his face. "Ah, agents. To what do we owe this unexpected pleasure? Just a routine check on the Sky Portal project, I presume? Rest assured, we have everything well in hand." He extended a hand, expecting the usual deference. Agent Vance, however, merely offered a curt nod, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Thorne, we are here on behalf of the National Building Oversight Agency. This is not a routine check. We have received serious allegations concerning systemic structural integrity issues across multiple Apex Solutions projects, as well as a pattern of irregularities in intellectual property accreditation and financial reporting." Her voice was calm, yet it carried an undeniable authority that instantly deflated Thorne's bravado. "We require full access to all project documentation, financial records, employee contracts, and internal communications, effective immediately." Thorne's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of irritation. He attempted to charm, then to intimidate. "I assure you, Agent, there must be some misunderstanding. Apex Solutions adheres to the highest standards. Perhaps we can discuss this over lunch? I'm sure any allegations are merely the work of disgruntled former employees." Agent Vance's eyes narrowed slightly, a subtle sign of her impatience. "Mr. Thorne, our mandate is clear. Any obstruction will be met with severe legal consequences. We are not here for pleasantries." Her team had already fanned out, systematically taking control of server rooms, archive offices, and key personnel. They moved with an efficiency that suggested they already knew exactly where to look. To Thorne's growing horror, their questions were not limited to the Sky Portal. They delved into the specifics of the Viridian Towers project from 5 years ago, a project Thorne had publicly touted as his own innovative design. Then, they brought up the Infinity Plaza, a high-profile development completed nearly a decade ago. Their inquiries were surprisingly deep, alarmingly specific, touching upon details that only someone intimately familiar with the original, unadulterated project plans could possibly know. Thorne, whose memory for specifics often blurred with his own self-aggrandizing narratives, found himself fumbling for answers, his carefully constructed facade beginning to crack under the relentless, professional scrutiny. He suddenly felt a chilling sensation, as if the very walls of his impenetrable fortress were beginning to whisper secrets he had long thought buried. The higher power had arrived, and it was far more formidable than he had ever imagined. The initial days of the NBOA investigation were a blur of controlled chaos within Apex Solutions. Thorne's attempts to regain control were met with the unwavering professionalism of Agent Vance and her team, whose every action underscored their absolute authority. They swiftly established a secure command center within the building, sealing off key departments and seizing digital and physical records. The atmosphere shifted from one of sleek corporate confidence to one of pervasive paranoia. Every whispered conversation became suspect, every email potentially incriminating. The investigation, initially dismissed by Thorne as a temporary nuisance, rapidly escalated. The NBOA wasn't just looking for a smoking gun. They were methodically disassembling the entire weapon. Their scope expanded from the Sky Portal to a spiderweb of projects, each new inquiry unearthing more than just superficial flaws. They uncovered discrepancies in financial reports, identifying inexplicable budget inflations and shadowy shell companies linked to subcontractors. Employee contracts were scrutinized, revealing a pattern of suspicious non-disclosure agreements and forced intellectual property transfers from junior designers to senior executives, primarily, though not exclusively, to Thorne himself. The digging became more aggressive. The NBOA brought in forensic accounting specialists who began to unravel the complex financial maneuvering designed to obscure illicit profits and kickbacks. Structural engineers, independent of Apex, were dispatched to other past projects, their findings corroborating the systemic issues hinted at in Elias's initial data dump. They found evidence of subpar materials being substituted for those specified in original blueprints, corners cut on safety protocols, and a consistent pattern of prioritizing cost-cutting over structural integrity, all decisions traced back to executive mandates under Thorne's directorship. Thorne, witnessing the systematic dismantling of his empire, spiraled into a frantic state. His charm evaporated, replaced by raw desperation. He began to issue frantic orders, demanding that his loyalists clean up the evidence. Archives were purged, hard drives wiped, and employees who might possess inconvenient truths were suddenly offered generous severance packages with ironclad NDAs or subtly threatened with professional ruin. "Find anything that can connect me directly to those decisions," he hissed at his head of legal, sweat beading on his forehead, "and make it disappear." However, Thorne's frantic attempts to cover his tracks only fueled the investigator's suspicions. The more he tried to conceal, the more obvious his culpability became. Agents observed his panicked commands, noted the sudden loss of critical documents, and interviewed employees who, while initially terrified, began to crack under the relentless pressure and the promise of immunity. Many had been silently suffering under Thorne's tyrannical reign, and the arrival of the NBOA offered a sliver of hope. The pressure mounted not just on Thorne, but on his entire network of enablers. His inner circle, once fiercely loyal, began to show cracks. Executives who had profited from his schemes now found themselves facing severe legal repercussions. Accusations, initially whispered, became louder as individuals began to fear for their own freedom and professional licenses. The meticulous records provided by Elias had meticulously outlined the chain of command, the approvals, the beneficiaries of each fraudulent scheme. It became increasingly clear that Thorne wasn't acting alone, but he was undeniably the orchestrator, the primary beneficiary. The walls of his protective bubble were not merely cracking, they were crumbling piece by agonizing piece, revealing the rot beneath. The unseen war was escalating, and Thorne, for the first time, felt the icy grip of true fear. The meticulous, almost surgical precision of the NBOA investigation began to reveal a truth far more disturbing than a single CEO's hubris. It became horrifyingly clear to the employees of Apex Solutions, and increasingly to the wider corporate world, that Marcus Thorne's transgressions were not isolated incidents. They were symptoms of a deeply entrenched, systemic corruption that permeated the very fabric of the company. Elias Vance's initial data dump had been a meticulously crafted roadmap, guiding the investigators not just to individual crimes, but to the entire nexus of deceit. The probe unearthed a sophisticated network of complicity. There were the facilitators in the finance department who skillfully manipulated balance sheets and created shell corporations to divert funds. There were the approvers in legal who drafted deliberately vague contracts and ironclad NDAs, ensuring that the true authors of designs remained uncredited and silenced. And there were the enforcers in HR and senior management, who ensured that any employee who dared to question Thorne's methods or claim their rightful credit was systematically sidelined, discredited, or forced out. This wasn't just about Thorne stealing designs for the Sky Portal. The investigation revealed a pattern spanning over a decade. Talented, innovative designers, often young and eager to make their mark, had their brilliant concepts subtly appropriated, their names erased, their careers stunted, while Thorne reaped the glory and financial rewards. One particularly poignant discovery was a folder filled with the original, award-winning blueprints for the Viridian Towers, a project that had cemented Thorne's reputation as a visionary. These blueprints, bearing Elias Vance's distinctive early signature, were starkly different from the compromised, cost-cut versions actually built. Several former employees, emboldened by the NBOA's presence and the promise of protection, began to step forward, their stories echoing Elias's unspoken narrative of exploitation. The pressure on Thorne intensified, but it also spread like a cancer throughout the executive suites. Board members, who had long turned a blind eye to Thorne's questionable practices in exchange for booming profits, now found their own positions imperiled. Investors, reading the grim headlines and the NBOA's increasingly damning press releases, began to pull their capital, sending Apex Solutions stock plummeting. The most profound shift, however, occurred within Thorne's once impregnable inner circle. His sycophants and enablers, who had basked in his reflected glory, now saw only the looming shadow of criminal charges. The first to break was Thorne's longtime head of acquisitions, a man named Sterling, whose testimony revealed how Thorne had routinely pressured him to acquire smaller design firms solely for their intellectual property, only to systematically dismantle the teams and claim their innovations as his own. Sterling, granted partial immunity, meticulously detailed how he had been forced to fabricate contracts and intimidate original creators. Soon after, Thorne's head of legal, a woman named Davies, provided internal memos and encrypted communications explicitly detailing Thorne's directives to suppress internal complaints and manage PR crises by discrediting any dissenting voices. She exposed the extent to which the company's legal arm had been weaponized to protect Thorne rather than uphold ethical standards. The revelations painted a damning picture. Apex Solutions was not merely led by a corrupt CEO. It was a corrupt system, a meticulously constructed edifice of deceit designed to funnel wealth and acclaim to Marcus Thorne at the expense of genuine talent and ethical conduct. The local system that had shielded Thorne for so long was now not just compromised, it was actively collapsing, its pillars buckling under the weight of its own long-buried transgressions. The higher power, activated by Elias, was not merely targeting an individual, it was dismantling a corrupt institution piece by painful piece. Thorne, now isolated, watched in horror as his former allies, one by one, turned their backs, their loyalty instantly evaporating in the face of their own impending ruin. The shadow on the company was no longer just his. It was cast by everyone who had benefited from his dark empire. Amidst the escalating chaos and the frantic scramble of high-powered executives, Elias Vance moved like a ghost. His mop bucket and cleaning supplies remained his constant companions, his routine unchanged. He continued to polish the marble floors, empty the overflowing wastebaskets, and tidy the deserted offices late into the night. Yet, his presence was now charged with a subtle, almost imperceptible significance. He was no longer just the janitor. He was the silent observer, the keeper of secrets, the calm eye in the center of the corporate hurricane. He saw the fear in the eyes of the executives, the nervous glances exchanged in the hallways, the hushed, frantic phone calls behind closed doors. He noted who avoided his gaze and who, perhaps out of a nascent guilt or a desperate hope, lingered for a moment, as if expecting him to confirm their worst fears. He saw Marcus Thorne, his face growing gaunt, pacing his office late into the night, a captive in his own fortress. Elias absorbed it all, his internal ledger balancing, his understanding of the company's true dynamics deepening with every observation. He was still in the shadows, but these shadows now held immense power. One of the NBOA investigators, Agent Mark Jensen, was different. He possessed a quiet intensity, a keen sense of observation that went beyond the obvious. Jensen was a man who noticed details others dismissed. He had seen Elias in the periphery of Thorne's outburst weeks ago, a fleeting, almost imperceptible flicker of recognition in the janitor's eyes when the Sky Portal project was mentioned. He had also noticed the almost photographic memory Elias displayed when, during a search for old blueprints, Elias had, without looking, directed a junior agent to a specific, obscure archive box in a seldom-used storage room, which subsequently contained crucial, uncatalogued documents. Jensen began to subtly observe Elias. He saw the janitor's precise movements, the way he would sometimes pause near a half-erased whiteboard, his gaze lingering on a complex equation as if deciphering it. He noticed that while Elias's face remained neutral, his eyes held a depth of understanding that belied his humble profession. During a lunch break, Jensen approached Elias, feigning a casual conversation about the building's history. "You've been here a long time, Mr. Vance?" Jensen asked, sipping his coffee. "Long enough to see a few renovations come and go," Elias replied, his voice soft, almost a whisper, as he polished a nearby glass partition. "Must know every nook and cranny of this place, then," Jensen continued, his tone conversational, but his eyes studying Elias's reaction. "Even the hidden ones, I imagine." Elias paused his polishing, his reflection momentarily meeting Jensen's in the glass. "Some things are better kept out of sight, Agent. Keeps them safe. Like old drawings, perhaps." He offered a small, enigmatic smile, then continued his work. Jensen caught the subtle hint. He knew Elias wasn't just talking about dusty blueprints. The janitor was providing breadcrumbs, guiding the investigation without directly compromising his own anonymity. Later that day, Jensen, acting on another of Elias's almost imperceptible suggestions, a comment about the old ventilation shafts and their tendency to collect forgotten things, discovered a sealed-off section of the sub-basement. Inside, hidden behind a false wall, was a meticulously organized collection of original design documents, old project proposals, and an internal memo from years ago detailing Thorne's restructuring of the design department, which effectively sidelined all original creators. These documents were the physical manifestation of Elias's earlier data dump, providing irrefutable, tangible evidence. Elias remained the elusive witness, never directly implicating himself, never overtly interfering. He was a silent conductor, orchestrating the unraveling of Thorne's empire from the shadows, his presence a constant, unsettling reminder to those in power that the unseen can often be the most dangerous. Jensen, for his part, began to develop a profound respect for the quiet janitor, sensing a depth and resilience that would soon shake the very foundations of Apex Solutions. The pieces were falling into place, guided by the hand of the man everyone had underestimated. The weeks that followed Agent Jensen's discovery in the sub-basement were a relentless pursuit of truth. The physical documents found there, meticulously preserved and cross-referenced by Elias, provided the NBOA with the irrefutable hard evidence they needed to complement the digital data already in their possession. The hidden mechanism had delivered a trove, each piece of paper, each yellowed blueprint, each confidential memo, a nail in Marcus Thorne's coffin. The NBOA's investigation, now a full-blown federal probe, expanded its focus to encompass the corporate governance of Apex Solutions itself. They discovered hidden servers, expertly concealed beneath layers of IT security, containing not only duplicate copies of Elias's original designs, but also a trove of internal communications. These emails and chat logs revealed a chilling pattern of collusion. Thorne's explicit directives to his legal and finance teams to sanitize project histories, reallocate intellectual property, and discourage any dissenting voices. There were even veiled threats against employees who expressed discomfort with the ethical breaches. Falsified contracts, meticulously prepared to obscure the original authors of various designs, were uncovered in a clandestine legal filing system. These contracts systematically stripped designers of their rights, transferring ownership of their intellectual property to Apex Solutions, often with little to no compensation beyond a paltry salary. The evidence laid bare a sophisticated, years-long scheme designed to systematically exploit creative talent for Thorne's personal gain and corporate advancement. The local system that had protected Thorne for so long, the complicit board members, the intimidated legal team, the sycophantic executives, was not just crumbling, it was completely disintegrated. Key figures within the company, facing federal charges and the prospect of lengthy prison sentences, began to turn state's evidence. Thorne's former head of legal, Ms. Davies, now terrified of losing everything, provided a comprehensive breakdown of the legal loopholes and fraudulent clauses she had been instructed to draft. Sterling, the head of acquisitions, detailed how entire smaller firms had been acquired, their founders pushed out, and their innovative concepts rebranded as Thorne's own genius. The most damning evidence emerged from a recovered, encrypted hard drive that Elias had subtly directed Jensen to, disguised as an obsolete backup unit. This drive contained a comprehensive project dossier compiled by Elias himself over years. It detailed not only the theft of his own Sky Portal design, but also the similar systematic exploitation of dozens of other architects and engineers. Each entry included dates, original design specifications, the names of the original creators, and a comparison to the later, altered, and often structurally inferior versions released under Thorne's name. It was a forensic architect's dream, a perfect timeline of intellectual larceny. The drive also contained personal journals from Elias, detailing his initial excitement at Apex, his gradual disillusionment as his designs were altered and stolen, and his growing resolve to expose the truth. He meticulously recorded instances of microaggressions, the dismissive comments, the subtle attempts to undermine his confidence, all culminating in his forced resignation and subsequent rehiring as a janitor, a deliberate move by Thorne's circle to keep him under wraps while exploiting his latent knowledge. It became abundantly clear that Elias's hidden mechanism had been flawless. His years of quiet observation, his meticulous documentation, and his strategic dissemination of evidence had built an unassailable case. The intricate web of lies, deceit, and systemic corruption woven by Marcus Thorne and his co-conspirators was now fully untangled, each strand exposed, each connection laid bare. There was no longer any room for doubt or denial. The local system had failed, and the higher system of justice, activated by the man they had dismissed as inconsequential, was now ready to deliver its verdict. The stage was set for the final act. The air in the federal courtroom was thick with a palpable tension, far heavier than any dust Elias Vance had ever swept. Marcus Thorne sat at the defendant's table, his tailored suit now seemed ill-fitting, his once imposing posture replaced by a defeated slump. His eyes darted nervously around the room, settling on the stoic faces of the federal prosecutors, then on the impassive jury, and finally, with a jolt of recognition, on the gallery where a few former Apex employees, their faces a mix of apprehension and quiet anticipation, sat. His carefully constructed world had imploded, and the debris was now being meticulously cataloged for all to see. The prosecution had presented an overwhelming case. Forensic accounting reports detailing billions in fraudulent transactions, sworn testimonies from former executives now granted immunity, and mountains of documented evidence of structural failures linked directly to Thorne's cost-cutting directives. The Sky Portal project, once his crowning glory, was now universally recognized as his greatest shame, a symbol of his criminal negligence. As the climax approached, the lead prosecutor, a woman with a voice like tempered steel, delivered her final, damning statement. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we have shown you the intricate web of deceit, the systemic corruption, and the calculated exploitation that defined Mr. Thorne's reign at Apex Solutions. We have presented the evidence of stolen ideas, compromised safety, and shattered careers. But there is one final piece of testimony, one irrefutable truth that binds all these crimes together. We would like to call to the stand the true architect of the Sky Portal project, and indeed, many of Apex Solutions' most lauded designs. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Thorne, his eyes wide with a sudden, dawning horror, began to shake his head almost imperceptibly. He knew. He finally knew. Then, the courtroom doors opened, and a figure stepped into the light. It was Elias Vance. He was no longer in the humble janitor's uniform. Today, Elias wore a perfectly fitted, dark gray suit, its understated elegance speaking of quiet confidence rather than ostentation. His posture was upright, his gaze steady and unwavering. In his hand, he carried a slim, leather-bound portfolio. He walked with a quiet dignity, his presence commanding an immediate, stunned silence from every corner of the room. The collective gasp from the gallery was almost audible. Thorne's face, already pale, drained of all color. His jaw dropped, and he stared at Elias, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief, terror, and a profound, agonizing comprehension. The man he had casually dismissed as a menial, the man whose quiet observations he had scorned, was now standing before him, not as a victim, but as his executioner. Elias walked to the witness stand, took the oath in a clear, resonant voice that surprised many who had only ever heard him whisper, and then turned to face the jury. He opened his portfolio, revealing original, meticulously hand-drawn blueprints for the Sky Portal, each bearing his earliest, undisputed signature and patent dates. He presented legal documents, dated years before Thorne's project launch, proving his original intellectual property. He calmly and methodically explained, with an engineer's precision, how Thorne's revised plans had introduced the very structural flaws that had brought the project to its knees, detailing the exact points of failure and the financial motivations behind each unethical alteration. His testimony was not delivered with anger or bitterness, but with a chilling, detached clarity. He spoke of the purity of design, the ethical responsibility of an architect, and the systematic destruction of both by Marcus Thorne. He presented cross-reference data, linking the Sky Portal alterations to similar compromises in dozens of other projects where his original designs had been plagiarized and debased. Thorne, watching Elias, felt his carefully constructed world shatter. He saw in Elias's eyes not the desire for revenge, but the cold, uncompromising light of impartial justice. It was a gaze that mirrored the NBOA investigators, but held a deeper, more personal weight. He had not merely stolen designs. He had stolen a man's legacy, destroyed his career, and then, in his boundless arrogance, dismissed him as an inconsequential shadow. Now, that shadow had risen, not for vengeance, but to demand a reckoning for the broken system. In that moment, Marcus Thorne finally understood the true cost of his fatal underestimation. Everything was over. The verdict was swift and unequivocal, a resounding pronouncement that echoed through the hallowed halls of justice. The jury, having absorbed Elias Vance's calm, irrefutable testimony and the mountainous evidence presented by the prosecution, found Marcus Thorne guilty on all counts: corporate fraud, intellectual property theft, criminal negligence leading to structural endangerment, and obstruction of justice. The once unassailable titan of industry, who had built his empire on the backs of stolen genius and ethical compromises, now stood stripped bare, his power dissolved, his reputation irrevocably shattered. The judge, a figure of stern rectitude, delivered the sentence with a gravity that left no room for appeal or pity. Marcus Thorne was sentenced to a substantial prison term. His arrogance and disregard for human safety and professional ethics met with the full force of the law. In addition to incarceration, he faced monumental fines, the total confiscation of his ill-gotten assets, and a lifetime ban from holding any corporate leadership position in the architecture or development industries. This Sky Portal, a symbol of his hubris, was slated for demolition and complete reconstruction under new, stringent oversight. But Thorne was not alone in his downfall. The web of complicity that Elias's hidden mechanism had so meticulously untangled also saw justice served. His inner circle, the head of legal, Ms. Davies, the head of acquisitions, Mr. Sterling, and several key board members who had actively facilitated or deliberately turned a blind eye to Thorne's crimes, also received fitting sentences, ranging from significant fines and probation to considerable prison terms, along with the revocation of their professional licenses. The message was clear: the higher system of justice, once activated, would not be swayed by power or influence. It was impartial, relentless, and absolute. The public reaction was immediate and fierce. Apex Solutions, once a symbol of corporate might, became a byword for corruption. Its stock plummeted to historic lows, its brand tarnished beyond repair. The company, facing a deluge of lawsuits from defrauded investors, endangered clients, and other architects whose work had been stolen, found itself on the brink of bankruptcy. The local system of power and patronage, which had once insulated Thorne and his cohorts, had utterly failed. It had been exposed, dismantled, and now lay in ruins, a testament to the fact that even the most entrenched corruption can be brought down by truth and unwavering resolve. Elias Vance, observing the proceedings from a quiet corner of the courtroom, felt no triumph, no gloating satisfaction, only a profound sense of quiet closure. He had not sought revenge, but justice. He had not aimed to destroy, but to rebuild, starting with the foundations of integrity and truth. The judgment delivered was not merely a punishment for Thorne. It was a vindication for every unsung talent, every compromised vision, and every broken promise. The scales of justice, once skewed by power, had been meticulously rebalanced. With the dust settled from Marcus Thorne's spectacular downfall, the corporate carcass of Apex Solutions lay exposed, a stark monument to systemic corruption. Yet, amidst the ruins, a new possibility began to emerge, quietly nurtured by the very force that had brought down the old regime. Elias Vance, having delivered justice, did not retreat into the shadows. His quiet, dignified presence and the irrefutable truth of his actions had resonated deeply, not just within the legal system, but with a public hungry for genuine integrity. Elias, however, had no interest in leading a corporate behemoth. His ambition was far more profound, to prevent such systemic abuses from ever happening again. He used his newfound, albeit reluctant, prominence and the significant resources recovered from Thorne's confiscated assets to initiate a sweeping program of systemic change within the architectural and engineering industries. His first major initiative was the establishment of the Vance Foundation for Ethical Design. This nonprofit organization was dedicated to supporting young, unrecognized talents, providing them with legal protection for their intellectual property, mentorship, and funding to bring their innovative ideas to fruition without fear of exploitation. The foundation became a beacon for integrity, a place where ethical practices were not just encouraged but legally and financially safeguarded. Concurrently, Elias actively lobbied for the implementation of stricter federal regulations concerning intellectual property rights in design and construction. He worked closely with Agent Eleanor Vance of the NBOA, whose respect for Elias had grown immensely, to draft new legislation aimed at increasing transparency in corporate project accreditation, strengthening whistleblower protections, and imposing severe penalties for design plagiarism and structural negligence. His quiet, authoritative voice, backed by undeniable personal experience and a meticulous understanding of industry loopholes, proved incredibly effective. Apex Solutions, now under the interim leadership of a federally appointed oversight committee, underwent a radical transformation. Stripped of its corrupted executive team and forced to confront its unethical past, the company was put through a rigorous process of internal restructuring and rebranding. The name Apex Solutions was phased out, replaced by Veritas Designs, a name symbolizing truth and integrity. The new leadership, carefully vetted and committed to a fresh start, began rebuilding from the ground up, with a renewed focus on ethical practices, employee empowerment, and transparent project management. Elias, though not seeking a formal position, agreed to serve in a consultative role, ensuring that the new company's internal safeguards were robust and truly protected creative talent. The Sky Portal project, once a symbol of Thorne's hubris, was meticulously redesigned and rebuilt, adhering strictly to Elias's original, flawless blueprints. It became a monument, not to a single man's ego, but to the triumph of ethical design and the resilience of truth. The final scene finds Elias Vance, several years later, standing on the observation deck of the newly completed Veritas Tower, formerly Sky Portal. It soars majestically, a testament to true architectural brilliance. He is dressed simply, a quiet smile gracing his lips as he gazes at the city below. Beside him, a young, aspiring architect, a beneficiary of the Vance Foundation, points excitedly to a detail in the building's innovative facade, explaining its elegant solution to a complex engineering challenge. Elias listens, a look of profound satisfaction in his eyes. He had not sought personal glory, but had instead activated a higher system of justice. inspiring systemic change and giving a voice to the voiceless. The story closes with a sense of deep catharsis, leaving the audience with the enduring message that true power lies not in position or ego, but in the unwavering pursuit of integrity, the quiet strength of intellect, and the courage to stand for what is right, even from the deepest shadows.